Okay, we're starting over. I have to remake this because my video card ate it. Nice card, right? Okay, so we're going to go back to info dumping and backstory, because those are two things that are super closely related. They're also very related to telling instead of showing. If you're very careful to be showing your action instead of telling the reader about it, you will tend to avoid them. Okay, so don't forget that. But on the other hand, there are four genre-ishnesses. One of them is not technically a genre, but there are four things, three of them genres, that tend to lend themselves to heavy info dumping, backstory, etc. The first one would be like fantasy, and closely related is the second, science fiction. There's so much world building in those two genres that they tend to lend themselves to a bunch of info dump backstory, because you're trying to get these people, these readers, to understand the people of this world and everything going in it and the history and all of that very quickly, so that they're not lost as they're reading it, right? But if you look at books like Narnia, okay, if you take Narnia, in that book, we don't enter this world and immediately know everything that's going on. We're confused. Why is it snowing? When it's not snowing back in the house, you know, I mean, I could just imagine myself going back to the wardrobe, check it out, come back, check it out. You know, it's like, wait, huh? You know, we don't understand why. And we don't learn why for quite a while. You know, into the story. I mean, it's not until they meet the beavers. So, I mean, there's all that story of them getting in there, they get in the wardrobe, they, you know, Edmund's lost, and we're in the beavers, and now we find out that it's been winter since forever, and why. And it's a little bit of dialogue. It's not this big, long history of everything that happened. It's just a little bit of dialogue to give you, so you're not confused indefinitely. Or you're not confused when everybody's excited to see spring arrive in a way that it's a little over the top, you know? So that is one case where I think C.S. Lewis did a fabulous job of giving us what we needed when we needed. And that's what I'm talking about with this backstory stuff. You can't just dump it on them at the beginning because they need to understand. They usually don't, okay? And science fiction and fantasy are both areas that I think it's really easy to fall into the info dump trap, okay? Additionally, historical is really easy to do it. I find myself learning all these amazing, fascinating tidbits when I'm researching for a historical book, and I want to put them all in there, and they don't all belong. And so if you're not careful, you can try to like weave some in, and that's good, but if you're not careful, then it becomes that dump, because if it doesn't matter to the story, if it's not going to add richness, and don't delude yourself, most of them don't, but if it's not going to add richness, you've got to leave it out. Historical just really lends itself because we think, oh, well, the reader doesn't understand, and so I've got to explain. If the reader can't understand, and you have to explain, does it really need to be in there? I mean, if you think about, we love books like Jane Austen, okay? And they have a whole societal realm that we're not a part of. And we tend to view through skewed and often false lenses. For example, a lot of things in the Regency era, people see through the Victorian lens. They assume it's the same as how life was in Victorian times, and it's not. I did that when I was working on Allard Niche. I really thought that a lot of those Victorian rules were like carryovers from the Regency, right? So I was trying to find chaperones for this girl so that she can go ride in this carriage, and my editor's like, you don't need that. And I really wondered at first if she knew what she was talking about, because I'm like, well, of course you need a chaperone. You can't just go off with some guy. And her response was, Marianne Dashwood, did Eleanor attack or condemn Marianne going off with Willoughby in the first place, or did she condemn her behavior when she was off with Willoughby? And I went, oh yeah, she never complained. She didn't say a thing about her going off. That was perfectly acceptable. What wasn't acceptable is how you behaved when you were gone and you're racing through town and you're, upsetting everybody. Okay, I get it. So if we were writing that story today, all right, we would be really tempted to dump that information in there so people understood that this is really okay. How many times have we read that story and we didn't know that and we didn't really notice or care, right? It didn't matter. It feels like it should matter, but it didn't. So you have to be really careful with historical, not to try to explain away the differences between how they thought and how we think they thought, right? So historical, those tidbits can be really interesting, and if they fit your plot, definitely put them in there. They're my favorite parts of history, but historical novels. But they are not my favorite part when it bogs down that story, and I'm just going, really? I don't need to know this. I don't need to know the custom of this and this and this. I just need to know it happened so that I know what's going on later when it makes a difference, right? So you have to be careful with that. And the other isn't technically a genre, but it fits within all the genres. And when you have a book written in first person, it is so easy to add way too much, because it's a narrative. It's me telling you my story, and you know how we are when we're talking, keeping it natural. We segue into these little asides, and then we segue back to the story, and it's natural, and sometimes that's how it should be. Particularly, you can get away with it a little more with like a memoir. If you've got a first-person account of a story that feels like a memoir. It doesn't have to be an actual one. It just, it's someone telling their story, and that is the novel. If you're not careful, though, you're going to take that and you're really going to just stretch it out too much, and it bloats it. I had that problem with Prairie and Highlands. I needed some of their backstory put into it, and yet there's no natural way to do that without forcing questions and conversations. And so sometimes I would just have them, ramble, because they're giving an account of their life in this place. And so I would have them ramble a little bit about their past. And I don't recommend it. It's not, in my opinion, the best way to handle it. It was just the only way that fit that series for me. There's probably a better way to do it. It's why I don't recommend it, because I just didn't know. And once I started that way with Prairie, I continued it because I figure it needs just to be what happens in this series. So if you like this one and this one, it'll be in the third one, and you're not going to be bothered by it. If you didn't like those two, you're not likely to read the third one anyway, so why not just keep the flow, right? So I did that with that. But you have to be really careful in first person not to take it too much, not to add too much info dumping, not to add too much backstory, because a lot of what's really important to that character and to you to know as an author is not important to your reader. You're just bogging them down, and when you bog the story down, people close it and they forget about it for 6 months or a year. And when that happens, you've lost them, and you might have lost them for your next book too. So just when it comes to genre, when it comes to info dumping, when it comes to backstory, be really careful, be really judicious with what you share. Share it when we need to know it. Foreshadow it, sure, but share it when we need to know it, okay?